Mother's Day edition of the Jake Feinberg Show live on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And, as I've been on this journey for 7 years or so, it has taken me to a lot of different places. But I have been motivated most strongly by those who were creating in an improvisatory style, riffing off the top of their head, understanding that the lag was a major part of the human condition, and how the idea of melodic improvisation and spontaneity can also play a role with wordsmiths. And nobody better epitomizes that than one of the original Merry Pranksters, Neal Cassady. And I've had a chance to speak to a lot of people that knew him, were very dear friends of his, like Ken Babbs and people like George Walker and Dale Kesey. And I've had a chance to talk to Jamie Cassady, and I get a chance today to speak to her older sister, Cathy Cassady. Happy Mother's Day and welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Well put.
Just, can you talk about motherhood? I mean, you are a mother yourself?
Yes, I am.
You talk about, I guess, more to really what I'd like you to talk about is what you learned from your dad about being a good mom.
Oh, that's a good one. He was compassionate and loving and delighted in us kids. And we felt that and knew that he loved us. And he was he was the playmate. We could play with him. He was supportive of our little ventures. And I remember when I was 8, writing my book, and he was very encouraging and supportive and helpful. And except for lack of boundaries and or discipline, he was the perfect parent as far as we kids were concerned.
What, obviously, the discipline continues to be an overriding issue for most people. With their habitual. What was your dad's true nature, and I guess how often did his habitual nature get in the way of his true nature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had, from the beginning, he was a survivor. And he's been lauded and, put down for his persona, which, of course, he was a con man. And that was out of necessity. And since he was practically raising himself, he had to do what he could to survive. And that affected the rest of his life, as well as the lack of nurturing and cruelty that he experienced. Studies have shown that changes your brain, literally.
Absolutely.
Changes your physiology. And he was, when he was 6, he was wandering around the streets of Denver by himself, trying to survive. And so that translated into, his ability his charisma, of course, and his ability to get what he needed from people. And so most of my life, I didn't understand that and was alternately embarrassed and, felt sorry for my dad and his tortured soul, and didn't realize, what was behind all that.
This is fascinating. As far as his persona as a con man, could you give an example of what he had to do to survive?
When he was started when he was a kid, and his memoir, dramatically portrays his living with his alcoholic father in the slums of Denver in the Flophouse condemned hotel, and he couldn't get his father to. Occasionally, he could get his father to wake up, but mostly his dad was passed out from drinking, and so this little kid, would have to get himself up and find a place to eat, and he'd go to the mission with all the other homeless people and get some breakfast, and then walk himself to school, 1.5 miles, and Dad explains this in a really entertaining way in his book about, he used the ball. He made a game out of it. He had a ball that he bounced and tried to give himself a time limit and tried to make it to school, by a certain time with this ball bouncing. And he just had a way of making the best of his circumstances. And so he just found a way to survive when he was a kid. And then as he grew older, his wiring was such that he was an adrenaline junkie, of course, and he was trying to find his kicks and keep himself stimulated. And I think he had a raging case of ADHD.
Well,
I think he was self-medicating with the speed initially because that's diagnostic. If it calms you down, you've got the wiring, that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, it services like myself, like, if I smoke marijuana, it actually doesn't mellow, it doesn't mellow me out, it shoots me up. So it's kind of like one of those things where, how much of it, I've talked to so many guys, John Perry Barlow, and rest in peace, and so many people that had just these little opportunities here and there to cross paths with your father, and I'm not talking about it from a daughter's point of view. I have 2 daughters, and I think that my older one especially would. The way you described your feelings about your dad when you were younger, and only later did you sort of come to understand the antecedents. I feel like actually there's this kind of overlap there with my daughter. I'm not claiming to be Neal Cassady by any means, but it's this idea of how much of his creativity was sparked from that survival that he had when he was a kid. And he was on his own a lot, but he must have had a lot of experiences that most kids his age did not have.
Good and bad, yeah.
Right. I mean, Stan Getz. I'm doing a documentary on Stan Getz, and he was on the road with Jack Teagarden in the 9th grade, and they were. I mean, basically the true. I mean, he was on the run, and back in the day, those guys were playing 360 days out of the year. So here's a 9th grader on the road, and the guys in the band were obviously bullies to him, and if a woman had syphilis or something, they'd say you need to sleep with her. They'd force him to sleep with and like it was so again, and then of course he learned to bend his right arm and become, he was a prolific alcoholic, and he learned that at that age. And did you ever know sort of how your dad was able to get out? Was there a definitive turning point for him to get up on his feet and get to Columbia?
Yeah. When he got the job at Southern Pacific, his brilliant, he luckily had a brilliant mind, and he could figure things out. And I'm not a fan of breaking the law, but I'm I'm so glad that he managed to pass that colorblindness test and be hired by the Southern Pacific Railroad. He had this work ethic that was superb, and he just never collecting tickets on the train with good pay. He could support his family. He was a responsible family man. Physically not there so much, but the perfect job for him. And he had his goal in life, his purpose was to be a responsible family man, and that was always what he was striving for. And until he was caught with the marijuana and sent to San Quentin, and lost his job, he was feeling pretty good about that. He worked himself up, and out. So.
Yeah, I mean, I looking back on it, I just was there. When did he first connect with Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg? Was it in Denver or was it in New York?
Columbia. Yeah, it was in New York.
So
yeah.
Can you paint that picture? You are the oldest child, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. So this is wonderful. I mean, can you talk about like being, because there were, I think if I remember Jamie telling me correctly, there's just a lot of always like, you guys are doing lots of arts and crafts. There's a lot of, but those guys were always in the, like, Carol, can you talk about your earliest memories of those guys being and what that was like?
Yeah, they were great. They all had good hearts, and you could tell and feel that. And I remember Jack camping out in the backyard. We had, a lot of I forget how much land we had, but he'd go camp out under the oak tree in the backyard, and he was always playing with us with words, and he was very gentle and comforting, a comforting presence. He had a wonderful energy that drew us to him. And Alan, I can remember I was so impressed and just fell in love with Allen Ginsberg when I was probably an adolescent. I remember sitting on the couch in the family room with him, just me and Alan, and he stopped everything and just asked me about my life and about me. And nobody had ever done that. I mean, my parents were too busy, and I was so enthralled that he seemed to care, and it seemed genuine and sincere, and I always had a soft spot for Alan ever since.
What do you remember what you said to him?
I don't. No.
Yeah, well, I'm just curious about it because I mean, I'm curious about the impact that how did you know? Like, when did you realize your dad was out working the railroads, and then he got? I mean, he would come home. Would he come home?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think it was in the '60s when he started going with Ken Kesey, and I was in high school, and I was embarrassed to death because you know how you are when you're a teenager, and he would come home.
This is unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, so you were more. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah. He would come home with these huge posters, the psychedelic posters. Can you pass the acid test? And the Merry Pranksters are hanging around in the bus and all this psychedelic stuff and the music. And to this day, I don't like anything to do with the '60s, music or otherwise.
I love you. I love this. I love how you have.
I know.
Explain. This is so important because I was born in '78, so this is way after my. But I want you to talk about why you were mortified.
Okay, because I inherited my mom's prude gene. I'm the one in the family. I'm the kid. I'm the firstborn, right?
Right.
So I'm all responsible, and I miss Goody Two Shoes. And John and Jamie are out partying and having fun and climbing out the windows at night and all that stuff. And I'm home in bed, trying to be the good girl. And I'm the one at home getting in trouble because I'm the only one Mom can yell at.
That's right.
They're out having fun. So we have my siblings and I have a totally different perspective on those times. And they were out enjoying it, and I was home trying to be good and not succeeding. But, I mean, So yeah, I have a different perspective. And then I still attempting to please mom and be the Miss Goody Two Shoes. And so yeah, I just the 60s to me are a very troubling memory time. I was trying to consolidate all that. And
What did you love to do? I mean, you were protective of your own. I mean, this was a period of free love and experimentation. But what did you love to
uh-huh.
do during that time to to escape? Because I guess, I mean, you're the Merry Pranksters at that time. I'm not sure what was. It's impossible to know what's going on in the moment, but they were not your, like, I'm not saying I would have been proud of my dad, but what he was doing
Uh-huh.
was completely pioneering and revolutionary
Uh-huh.
in some ways. But that in itself didn't. It was just, to you. It was the lifestyle. It was the
Right.
what was it that was, or was it just the mere fact that you knew your mom had no control of him, of your dad?
Yeah, yeah. I probably was, tying into mom's energy. She was very disapproving, right? Very disapproving and critical. And of all the siblings, I'm the most like her in that way. And I think it was just, osmosis, being around mom and her dislike and disapproval of all these activities and lifestyle, and how she was raised. I often asked her, what were you thinking? How did you possibly get together with Dad? Because do you know her background? She
Well, I
she
mean,
was
yeah. Go ahead. Not that well.
opposite. Yeah, she was raised in an educated family, and all her siblings. She had four siblings. They all got graduate degrees, as did mom. And her dad was the head of the biochemistry department at Vanderbilt University. He was a PhD and a biochemist, and her mom was an educator, a high school English teacher, and their house was full of art and classics and music. And she was a debutante and had a coming out party in the South, and educated at private girls colleges and Bennington, Vermont. And then she was in Denver getting her master's in theatrical design when she met Dad.
But
And
how did they? This is so beautiful. I mean, it is beautiful because, here it is, your dad just being a street scholar and your mom kind of, growing up with having all the resources to get educated. There
mhm.
must have been something very attractive between them.
Mhm. It was yes, the intellectual and spiritual connection.
Can you talk about the spiritual
Yes.
connection? There was a spiritual connection
Oh
there.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Very much so. They were both on the same wavelength, and one of the driving forces was for them was the same question: why are we together? Why are we so connected? That doesn't make sense. And so, of course, they couldn't figure it out until Dad found that book about Edgar Casey in the back of one of the cars that he was parking in the parking garage. And that just answered all their questions. And from then on, they felt so much relief, and they just absolutely dove into and delved into all the reincarnation and the metaphysics. And that's how we were raised. We were raised with all the metaphysical and Asian, Eastern beliefs, East
Well,
Eastern
I am
philosophy.
a Taoist. I'd love you to.
Yes,
Could you talk about the
yes,
metaphysical to the audience? Not to me,
yes.
but I mean, what things
Sure.
resonated with you? Because I mean, you claim you got your mom's
Yes,
prudish side, but I mean,
yes,
the Eastern spirituality is very liberating, kind of thing.
yes, yes. I'm right. We first initially she would take us to um, Sunday school at Christian Science Church, and we'd go to Christian Science Sunday school. And so we never saw a doc or a dentist or anything, until we were teenagers. And we would make pets out of our little flies, and we would use thoughts as, energy. We just learned all about the energy of love, and So we started out that way, and then we ended up just sitting at home. We'd into metaphysics and reincarnation and Edgar Casey, and she communicated with a lady in Death Valley who sent us a regular newsletter, and she was communicating with UFOs.
Really?
And so we were raised, yeah. So we were raised learning all about alien activity, and I can remember lying outside on the grass waiting for the UFOs to come down and visit us when we were kids.
I want to go back. I want to go back for a minute. This
Yeah.
this Christian Science upbringing. I want you to go back. You said we didn't see a dentist or a doctor for how many years?
Oh, I think when we were in middle of high school.
And then you said you made.
Luckily.
Yeah, I mean, what? That's so. That was more your. Where did that come from? Was that more your mom's upbringing? That's not Eastern.
Yeah, no. It appealed, I guess, because I don't think there was a Unity Church then. Mom eventually we became, she joined the Unity Church and was very much involved. But I don't think there was a Unity Church in Los Gatos. So that must have been the closest thing she could find.
And then, no, absolutely. And then, so, when did the metaphysical? What could you talk about an experience? I mean, some of that stuff. If I was your age growing up, I mean, I would have tuned it out unless something had happened to me that was that validated it. Could you talk about an experience that you had that?
We had many past life regression readings. I think as we got older, but I really, having a tendency to ADHD myself, the meditation, I really, really liked the meditation. And the concepts of, it all made sense to me, the reincarnation and working out lessons and learning, life lessons here, choosing your situation before you come into this incarnation to get learn the best lessons, the best way you can. It just all made sense to me. And I did have a lapse of like 30 years when I was busy raising a family and didn't, wasn't particularly involved in any spiritual practice. But then I retired and got back into it. And so yeah.
And I'm curious about if you could. Life. I mean, was there? So your folks were puzzled about their connection, but then what are the tenets of reincarnation according to the Cassady doctrine? I mean, what does that look like? I mean, because some people will say in the Tao it's always about transcending the cycle of birth and death, and that inevitably you're here on this earth to find your true nature and cultivate, and then ultimately you come back in a different form, maybe not obviously not in the same form, but in any event, what was the? I'm just looking for. I'd love you to talk about.
They believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were raised to believe that you come back in another human form if you are there in your evolution. On the other side, you are an entity that knows what your ultimate goal, of course, is. Total enlightenment, and to achieve that, you have different incarnations on Earth to learn physical lessons about love and connection and all the things that happen down here. And then, as in between lives, you are helping other entities. You are deciding which your next, different levels. There are different. It's not all on Earth physical, lessons. So it's very complex, but basically that's what it was. And she would, we'd all just talk about it and learn about it and read, the readings from Edgar Casey. He did past life readings and for people, and also helped tap into their energy. I'm totally into energy. I think it's all energy, and tapping into the loving energy that is called God. And everybody, in my view,
it's very well put. No, I mean,
yeah.
So I mean,
everybody. I feel everybody is has their own religion. If there's that many religions in the world, each individual has their own, and figures it out.
When did you realize that that a lot of the ethos behind the Merry Pranksters was taking psychedelics?
I don't know. Probably when I was a young adult and heard or read about it, because I got out of the house when I was 18, and my sister and brother were still living with Mom for years, and were involved in that world, and I kind of wasn't. So I had to read about it, or hear, or maybe somebody wrote me a letter.
So what did you do? I'm curious about what Cathy Cassady did. I mean, where did you go?
Well, I went to Texas. I got married and had lived with my first husband was in the Army, and so we were in Texas, and then in Washington State, and then came back to the Bay Area. But I was raising my son. I have one son and two stepdaughters now. I'm married to my George, and he has two daughters. So I have 3 kids and 6 grandkids. But my son was my only, biological child, and he's now, father of 4 and very successful, has his own business. And I went on to graduate school. At first I was a medical transcriber, which Mom taught me how to do in the hospital. And then I worked my way through college. I didn't go back till I was 38, and realized as I was sitting there typing, this is not healthy. I was in pain all the time, and it was before ergonomics. And so I went back to school, and I got my BS in exercise physiology and my MS in worksite wellness management. And so I could go to companies and help employees be healthy and fit. And I ran their wellness and fitness programs. And so, I kind of did my thing, and the family was still, at home doing their thing, and I wasn't really close for a while. We were all very friendly and loving, but I wasn't involved,
Right.
day to day.
Well, I mean, this is interesting. Could you talk about, when you actually, I mean, when was the last time you communicated with your father before he died?
I have on our website, the Neal Cassady Estate website, I have a story of when I saw Dad last. And it was when I had my son. So just as my son came in, my dad was on his way out. And he died, February. I saw him in September of 67. And then he died in February 68. And so, yeah, I was up in Washington, and I got the call, and I was 19, and Mom called and told me he passed away. And I must say, I had a wonderful experience. I was down in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, where he died. Last year, I got the opportunity to be a volunteer at their huge writers' conference. And I'd always wanted to make a pilgrimage there, to see where Dad spent his last days. And so I got a chance to go there, and it was so moving on many levels. And I had this wonderful tour of one of the locals helped me not a local, he's an expat,
Mm-hmm.
helped me. He showed me where Dad had lived, and I got to retrace his steps. And Dad's a legend in San Miguel. Everybody knew who he was, and I was faded. They had the whole staff. It was quite something, and it was wonderful to bring closure to that and see where he spent his last days.
Did you become closer? Did you reconcile with your brother? I mean, not that there was bad blood or anything, but did you get
Oh yeah.
noticeably comfortable, more closer with your family once
Yeah.
your dad passed on?
Yeah, I just, as I matured and realized the whole story, the big picture, it wasn't. I lost a lot of this. We're all human, and it's been great. I mean, we're just really close. We're really close. I love my siblings so much, and we got a chance. It was a wonderful experience. I mean, Mom passing away wasn't wonderful, but we all three of us got to go spend 3 weeks in her home in England after she passed, and it was the first time as adults that we had spent time together, just the three siblings. It was really, really great.
Can you talk about some of the word games that you guys would play with your dad? Because the guy was so influenced by. I mean, I've interviewed 3,500 musicians, and I've interviewed a lot of jazzers, and your dad took such a script out of the free-form improv. But I would love you to talk about the word games that you guys would play together.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, he loved words and loved learning. He would constantly, whenever he wrote to us, and I just found a letter the other day. I wish I could read you a little bit of it. Every other word he would say, look it up, or he'd define it in the letter. So his letters were always very choppy because he was so intent on having us understand every word, and he'd use big words, and he was so well self-educated, and he loved words and language so much, and I can remember being taught by him all the time. He was educating us all the time. I mean, even if we're outside playing catch, he'd be streaming all kinds of experiences he'd had or advice, or he'd always
just for my own and for the could you imitate like his voice, like what it would sound like and how quick it would be?
I couldn't possibly. I don't think anybody could. People have tried, they haven't. Nobody has really been able to catch him. Was it so rapid fire that you'd have to say, "Dad, go back and repeat that," or like? No, no.
It was completely.
It wasn't that. Totally understandable. Just the good cadence, and it was pauses and things. He was just always on, and he was his mind was just racing, and he was trying to keep up with it, and I can relate. I mean, I do the same thing, but he was very understandable, and he just was delightful. He was, everybody seems to think he had a joy of life, but that was his. He was energetic, and he had a way with words, of course, and so he seemed to be always happy and excited, but of course underneath he had a horrible, traumatic, really tortured soul, and he really had dealt with so much. When you read about the treatment he got from his step and half siblings when he was a kid, and how he had to watch his father be beaten unconscious by them, it does something to you. And he was constantly struggling to overcome that.
I'm sorry. So
And that,
your mother was. I'm sorry. His mother was never in the picture, but his dad got remarried to somebody, and his those stepkids
mm,
used to beat him.
his, yeah, his mother had been married before, and she had a lot of kids. But he had a lot of step siblings, and I'm not sure. Couldn't keep track of them all. I'm not sure, half
So I
half
mean,
in step, but
I just want to be clear. Like his parents lived in Denver, but they lived separately.
yeah, yeah. They were together for a while, and then his dad's drinking just got too much, and so when he was 6, they separated, and he lived with his dad for a while in Denver. In downtown, of course, Larimer Street now is all very posh and expensive. And have you been there?
No, but I can only imagine that it's more like a
uh,
hipster thing now than anything else.
they've made it very, very touristy and expensive restaurants and fancy stores out of all the buildings that remain.
But at the time, it
So,
was slums, though.
oh yeah, it was a condemned hotel, and he described this room he shared with a guy that didn't have any legs, another alcoholic, and he and his dad shared one cot, and rats running around, and various vermin, and he had the guy Shorty, the guy without legs, would get up and propel himself downstairs with his arms, and then had a cart with wheels that he'd push himself along with his arms, and park himself outside a restaurant and beg. And his dad's dad would be passed out. And so my dad would hear the chimes from the clock tower, and he'd know he'd have to get up, and he'd get himself down to the Mission and get breakfast, with all the other homeless guys and alcoholics. But it was, in the middle of winter and snowing, and
Yeah, it was freezing cold.
yeah, no,
I mean,
yeah.
it's like so interesting, and that was preferable to him than living with his mother.
He didn't have. I don't think he had a choice. At 6, you just go where they tell you. And
Right.
I forget the details, but in his book he tells, they decided he would live with his dad, and he did have some good times with his dad. I mean, occasionally, his dad would be fine, and on weekends they took travels, and his dad taught him how to ride the rails, and they would have adventures. So that's a good part of the book. He would write about that was fun.
When
He'd
did
have fun with his dad. Was coherent.
Yeah, I mean, he was your father had a profound impact on the point of view of at least a couple members of the Grateful Dead. He lived in their house for a while.
Hmm.
Did Ken Kesey? There was a certain point where. Let me just read you this quote and get your response to this. When I interviewed Ken Babbs, I've done 5 interviews with Ken, and he was talking about this idea. I said, why? I got the impression that Kesey was on the lam and he had to go to Mexico, but it turns out that your dad had a couple. If he had another felony against him, he was going to have to go back to jail. And so Kesey took the hit and then faked his suicide, and then he went to Mexico. But
Right.
when your dad passed away, did you get a chance to? Did you realize then how impactful and how much of a mentor he was to even people like Ken Kesey? Did they tell you how special?
Uh-uh. No. I no. I You know more about that than I do. Like I said, there was like a 30-year gap where I just wasn't, didn't know what was going on in that realm, and especially after Dad died. So, yeah, I have to read about it.
Right. So I mean,
But
you,
I
yeah.
don't remember when I first found out that he was. I think it was when all the books started coming out and all the movies were being made, and it was just I couldn't keep up. I kept at first I'd try and buy every book that came out
Right.
about these guys,
Right.
and I couldn't keep up, and it just is. I was in the bookstore, and I love history, and I love. So I'm looking at this Lost San Francisco book with all these beautiful old photos of old San Francisco, and there's a whole chapter, and there's my dad about the hippies, and he turns up. These guys turn up everywhere. I just so I'm just constantly just flummoxed, as my mom would say, that these guys keep showing up. And now, of course, I'm I have to put in a plug for
Yeah.
my book that just
Please.
came out, for our book. When my mom passed away, we knew Dad wrote. We knew Dad wrote a lot of letters. He was a prolific letter writer. We've seen all his books of letters, and we knew Mom had written her memoir, Heartbeat, and then the one that was made into a movie with Nick Nolte playing Dad, and Sissy Spacek played Mom. And then that was just an excerpt from her main manuscript, which she published in 1990, which is called Off the Road. And so we knew she wrote that about her life with Dad and Jack and Alan. And we knew she was an artist, and we knew she did theatrical work, and but we didn't know until she passed that she had volumes of writing of her own. And so we just published a really, really delightful, charming travel book that she wrote about a trip she took with my sister to Europe. Her first trip to Europe, and she was 56, and she was so excited and delighted to finally make it. And she documented it every second in all kinds of different ways. And so we published this book that just came out on her birthday, April 28th.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And we're very excited. And so now it's on Amazon. It's called Travel Tips for the Timid, and it's very good. It's got her illustrations. She illustrated. She's an artist, and so she did pen and ink sketches, really cute. And she talks about all the funny and challenging things that can happen when you're traveling. So a lot of people can relate, and it's just really cute. And so anyway, she's a big writer, and we didn't know she was doing all this. And she wrote poetry, and she lived in England for 30 years, and she was away from the family. So her poetry is very poignant and about loneliness. And so we're trying to now promote Mom's accomplishments and talents. And the women, were just an appendage to the guys back then, as happens in history and all through history. And they were written out, and so we're trying to help people realize what talent and how accomplished, Mom was. And so we'll be publishing some more of her work too.
You
And
even when you say an appendage, that's not like
mhm.
it doesn't strike me as being let's see, the sort of hierarchical kind of thing. But that's what you're getting at, is that they were always they had their role, and it was no farther than
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, they were just of course Mom was the reason that everybody went to San Francisco, Dad and Jack and Alan.
Explain
They
that.
followed her
Explain that.
there.
Explain that.
Well, Dad did. Well, Mom had, when she met Dad, she was getting her master's in theater arts, and she had a provisional job offer from Hollywood. And they told her, you have to wait a little bit, we'll figure it all out. So she went to San Francisco to live with her sister while she waited, because my dad had taken off again, and she'd said, that's it, this is it. I'm going to pursue my own life here. And so she went to San Francisco, lived with my aunt, and That's where I was born. And then she married Dad and lost a job in Hollywood. But Dad went to San Francisco to patch things up with her. He divorced his first wife and married Mom. And then so because Dad was there, Jack came, and then Alan came, and so that's how they kind of coalesced.
This is so fascinating, though. This is interesting. You're telling me that your mom and dad met, and then he went. Then he went to Colombia, and she just got kind of fatigued by his shenanigans, and then he wound up marrying another woman, and before he decided to marry her.
When they got married, and then they traveled around.
I'm sorry. We had a drop in the internet signal. Can you just start over? Because this is so important. Yeah.
Yeah. He had married this Luann Henderson, who was I think 15 at the time, and they traveled around the country, and they ended up going to New York in '47. I think is when he met, because he knew Hal Chase, who's a friend of Dad's, and Hal went to Columbia, and he knew Jack Kerouac, and he when Dad and Luann were in New York, this was before Dad met Mom, he met Jack and Alan and the Columbia gang there.
Okay, so continue. This is so important. Yeah. So he met the gang, and he was already married at that point to another woman.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And then because he was raised in Denver, I'm not. There are beat scholars out there that are going to chew me up. Because
listen, you know what I mean. Let me tell you something, Cathy. It's so beautiful. I don't give these scholars. It's time to, you lived it. So, you weren't. To hear it from the original source. My entire thing is a stream of consciousness kind of thing. So, you don't even worry about it. You tell it the way you believe it. Okay.
The time frame, my timeline may be off a little bit. But by the time he got back to Denver, and he knew Bill Thompson, who Mom happened to be dating at the time, and Mom was living in a hotel. We got to see the hotel where they met, and so Bill Thompson, called Mom up. This is all in Mom's book, Off the Road. So if anybody's interested in reading Off the Road,
plug it, yeah.
Yeah, she says that. Bill Thompson introduced her to this guy, Neal Cassady. And, there was an instant connection, I think, but she was, at one point she said, thank goodness there was no physical chemistry. It was all, intellectual, because she'd always had trouble before with just the chemistry. And so this was, there was no physical attraction, but she loved his mind, and so, he was so, even when he was a kid, he would go to the library and read the library shelves by the foot. He would read 10 feet of books. It didn't matter. He was just so well read, and he was so intelligent, and he that attracted her. So they started dating, and, Dad was not one to worry about rules and laws, and so he was married, but he was dating her. And
where was his wife at the time? Was she there as well?
There, she was there. Yeah.
He was totally uninhibited though, and he really. Oh
yeah.
Yeah, this is fast. So then he.
Oh yeah, I think they call them sociopaths now, where they just do what they want.
Free spirits,
free
rules spirit.
Or laws against it. That's another word, free spirit.
Well,
but,
is there really?
He just loved being around Mom.
He loved. So he was very fond of that, of your mother. But on an intellectual level, and then she got.
Well, he was, of course, attracted. He was attracted physically, but
right.
That goes without saying.
Right.
But he was. Luann was a constant in their lives. He never really dropped Luann. Even when they were divorced, he'd go see her, and Mom knew it. And even when Mom was pregnant with my sister, Dad went to New York and married Diane Hansen and had a son. So he was
Oh, that's pretty
having kids all over the place.
Yeah, that was pretty sociopathic.
I know, and I'm surprised. I'm really surprised that Cassidys haven't popped up out of the woodwork all over the country.
Well,
Because Dad didn't practice safe sex.
well, obviously, and he was able to.
And
Yeah, he was very fertile cat. But I mean, he like
yeah.
basically. So they began, but then your mom decided to move to San Francisco herself. She decided to go off and start a career there. Is that right?
Yeah, I think she had me. I think. Let me see the timing. I remember Dad. I don't know. Maybe that's when he found Luann and Alan and Dad in bed together in Denver. Yeah, that may be it when she left. I think that did it.
Right.
That may have been the incident.
That was
That would do it.
right. So Luann was always in the picture, and then your mom bolted, and your dad was like, "Well, I'm gonna go and move out to San Francisco." Is where she was.
He pursued her. Yeah.
And then, but like essentially, I guess I'm interested. I think this is actually pretty. Did you hold your dad responsible? When I talked to Jamie, she talked about being on food stamps and eating block cheese and
Oh yeah.
and did you? I mean, maybe it's self-evident.
Yeah.
But
Here's the thing. No, when he was in prison, all three of us sit around and we still shake our heads and say, "How did we not know? He was gone for 2 years. We had no clue. It was not anything except for being on welfare. It wasn't. Life was just the same. We didn't even realize he was gone for 2 years. we still shake our heads. How did Mom do that?
You didn't.
He was a remarkable survivor.
No. I mean, this is so. But you didn't. What I'm saying is, you really. I would say that it's almost. I'm not going to say that. You really despised the entire sort of scene itself, but or whatever vibe was being given off as far as that '60s movement. But you didn't hold your dad responsible for the situation that that you guys found each other in.
No, that was when we were way younger. I was like 10 when he was arrested. And so there was no, I just loved him to death. It wasn't until I became got in high school and got through all the hormonal garbage and the puberty and everything that I started feeling that embarrassment. But when I was a kid, we just loved him to death and idolized him. He was so cool. And so when he was imprisoned, I was 10, and then he got out, I was 12. But because he was gone so much, this shows you how much he was gone when he was on the railroad. Because he was gone so much anyway, we didn't really miss him when he was in prison.
Right. Well, that's interesting. He was gone a lot of the time anyway.
Yeah.
What would
Mom, told us, I guess he was on a job, and we just took that as okay and went on with our lives. Kids are really egocentric, and you're all wrapped up in your own lives. So we just took that as okay. He's on a job, and that was that. And we got letters. I don't know. We must have thought he was writing, because he'd write when he was on his jobs. When he was gone, and we got letters. In fact, in his book of letters, in Grace Beats Karma, you can see the letters from prison. You can see there's some of the letters he wrote to us, and you can see how he, defined all the words and that way of writing, and get a feel for his stream of consciousness writing style, which of course Jack picked up and got famous for. And that's why the Joan Anderson letter is so important and significant, because it changed Jack's whole writing style.
Do you have a memory of, or how would you guys normally be spending this day when you were growing up in Los Gatos?
Oh, yeah. Well,
I mean, like, what would your dad? Your dad wasn't out there like freestyle. I mean, was he barbecuing? Was he taking?
No.
I mean, what I'm saying, was he?
Well, he would play with us. He'd be watching sports or race car driving or boxing on TV.
He loved race car. He knew the lag. That was the
race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And he ate whenever he was home. Oh my goodness. I remember making breakfast for him would be like, we didn't have a toaster, so we'd lay our bread out on the top shelf of the oven and use the broiler as a toaster.
Mm-hmm.
And we would just line up that whole shelf with bread for him for breakfast, and we'd cook like 3 to 5 eggs, and he burned it off so much and he didn't get regular meals, I guess, a lot. So he would eat a lot when he was at home. And we're looking at publishing a cookbook of off the road and on the table kind of thing of all the meals we had at home. And he ate a lot. He would love to play catch. I remember playing games out in the front yard, anything physical. And he was such an athlete. He was so accomplished physically and coordinated. And he loved to play catch, and we'd play Red Rover and tag and, all that kind of stuff. And he would chess. He would instruct us, and we'd play chess. And
so he knew how to do everything. But would he pay? Did he have the ability? Was he too much of a free spirit, or did he have the ability to convey to you guys, to the kids, that if it was Mother's Day, that he did love your mom, that he loved your mom?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we knew they had a connection. We'd hear a lot of, there were later on, there were a lot of loud voices and shouting, but they were really good about keeping that stuff away from us. I only remember one time when I found Mom crying. She had a real struggle, all the chaos going on. And her goal was to keep us and have as normal a childhood as she could possibly have for us, despite all this going on around her. And she managed pretty well, because we still, today, the three of us, are just amazed the incredible job she did of keeping all the chaos and the troubles and the cops coming to the door all the time, and we didn't know any of that. She did a great job of screening that from us. And Dad was wreaking havoc in various ways all the time for her.
Why were the cops were coming? Why were the cops coming to the door?
Mm-hmm.
What I mean, what?
Various. I don't drug thing. He was kind of. They had their eyes on him all the time. He was
a local. I mean, when was the? Can you just talk about the? I mean, the stories that come from guys like John. I mean, I'll send you all these interviews. You can listen to them because you're going to crack up. But it's like,
yeah.
I mean, the guy was notorious for driving down Divisadero, with. Having 4 conversations at one time, not looking at the road, and almost having I think Bob Weir said he had a psychic almost dimension. He had a psychic dimension, so he was already tapping into his own true nature, which was metaphysical. But did you take driving lessons with your dad?
Oh yeah. We remember. Yeah, he always instruct us never to use your brakes, and downshift and all this good stuff. And we'd sit on his lap.
Never use the brakes, he said? Never use the brakes?
No, you don't use brakes. No. You use downshift, when you need to. And
that's brilliant.
Of course, all the cars were shift back then.
Right.
But we'd sit on his lap, and I can remember being scared, occasionally when he was driving. And I do want to say, I forgot to say how... we would always say grace. The spiritual would come in with him as well. He was raised Catholic, so that was kind of contentious thing between Mom and he. And at first, she had to she felt obligated to get him out of that guilt mindset. It never really worked, but that's one thing that metaphysics helped with, because he was still entrenched in the Catholic dogma and stuff. And so we'd always say grace before each meal. Every night he was home, we'd say the Lord's Prayer at night.
Wow.
holding hands.
That's amazing.
It was very...
When was that? I mean, I can't even imagine with the kind of upheaval that he had. When was that? When was he?
Yeah.
When was that indoctrinated?
I remember he was... he was an altar boy at one point. It might have been some kind of sanctuary for him, to go to church. I don't know if he went with his parents. I can't
Well,
imagine.
this
But
is this was before your his. It was
oh
before.
yeah, when he was a kid,
Right, but it was before his mom got fed up with his dad and left him.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he
Yes. See,
he
when he was.
really had it was probably a sanctuary for him. He would say grace, so your mom was cool with that.
Mhm.
But you
Yeah.
say he was racked with guilt.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He was. He tried to commit suicide several times, but he just was unworthy. He was a sinner. All that stuff, and so they really. That's another reason they really loved the metaphysical and the new thought, because it freed you from that. But anyway, so sorry, I got distracted.
No,
But
I pulled you away. Yeah, go ahead.
talking about his driving and his
Downshifting and don't use.
ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he would, he was always involved with cars in one way or another, and he loved racing and watching ball games with him, and Sandy Koufax and Willie Mays were our big heroes, and we just all joined him in whatever he loved, and loved it too. So it was all fun and games with Dad. We didn't have any feelings of not till I got older and became a teen, then my views changed. But when we were kids, it was all wonderful. Just missed him when he was gone.
Well, I was going to ask
But
you, like, when did you miss him the most when he was gone? Considering that the amount of what's the right word, upheaval he was causing. It was just that sort of
hmm
that was it just the playfulness? Was it just his sort of spirit?
yeah, his energy. I don't remember pining or yearning or any of that, but it was always just a wonderful, wonderful feeling and delight when he was home. And at least for me, I'm sure siblings agree, but they kind of held him up on a pedestal all the time, and he kind of fell off his pedestal when I got to high school. I can remember when we were in like a restaurant. I must have been maybe 13, or when you're going through that junior high
Oh my,
age,
yeah,
and
hard. It's just
everything's horrible, and so we were at a restaurant. The only time I remember eating out, we never went out as far as I remember, because funds were tight, limited funds for sure. But one time we went out, and I can remember just wanting to crawl under the table. Dad was so friendly to all the waitresses, and to everybody. He was just out there, and I was, being this shy little thing. I was pathologically shy when I was a kid. Oh my gosh,
that's
I
fascinating
couldn't.
considering
Dad.
he was so extroverted, and I
Mhm.
mean whether or not he even knew he was. It's like you're there with. He's there with his wife, and it's coming across as if he's flirting with all the waitresses. It's a really kind of like,
Yeah.
and it would be kind of more to, but I don't think he saw that, right? He probably didn't even wasn't aware of it.
No. Being friendly, yeah. He was just always reaching out, and he would just had an expansive energy, and it was including everybody. And so we did learn, we were tolerant of all kinds of people, and I love that about, we were raised in an exclusive kind of. Now it's really so exclusive to live in Los Gatos and Saratoga. When we were living there, Dad had been injured on the railroad, and they got a settlement, and so that's how they could buy the house in Montecito, which is between Los Gatos and Saratoga in the South Bay. And we were going to school with all the doctors and lawyers' kids.
Wow.
And it it was a very high-end exclusive area, and still is now, even more so. But I felt, I don't think my siblings did at all, but I internalized this. I thought we were really poor, and I felt like there was one Hispanic family. We had no ethnic diversity at all. There was one Hispanic family in my whole school career that I remember. We were there, from first grade to graduating high school. In the whole 12 years, I never saw, that I can recall, anybody other than this one Hispanic family. And so, but we were raised with this tolerance of all, races and creeds and religions, and a big open-hearted. I love that.
Well, it's so beautiful, because I'm just wondering though, did part of your sort of visceral backlash to the whole lifestyle and what was going on at that time, did it have to do with the fact that you were part of a family that was clearly, at least your father, was totally outside the mainstream, and here you are going to these schools with all your peers that are, they sort of like the way your mom was raised, much more traditional, sort of,
right.
Doing what society says you need to do in order to be successful, and here you're like, yeah, well, my dad is
exactly.
Was that part of it? Did that play a role in it?
Yeah. I never invited anybody. No, I had one friend, and she would come. One good friend would come to our house. This secret, and it wasn't spoken, and especially anything to do with the metaphysical side of things. In those days, you didn't talk about that at all. Spiritual
it's
thing
so
was
funny.
Real,
it's all I talk about.
Real,
But then it was.
Yeah.
I mean, what people would.
When I was a kid, no, you didn't talk about that. It was too woo-woo, crazy stuff. And it was not accepted at all,
Oh, wow.
at least where we were. And everybody was very straight-laced. And, I felt like, they had me to pick on and this Hispanic family. I mean, that was what I felt like. Because I felt so poor. And we wore all hand-me-downs and, everything. We rarely got something new. It was really a big deal when we got something new. And otherwise we'd get clothes from, friends and of course welfare. I just hated the used shoes, that kind of thing.
I dig it. No, I mean, but I mean, like he made it a point to take that settlement money and move you guys to, it's probably really upper scale now, but I mean, it was a conscious thing to move to that particular region. I mean, it's interesting that he decided just because of education, maybe?
I think it was mom's, I think mom
the woman makes the decision on it.
Chose it.
Yeah.
Yes. But, it was it's still a beautiful area. It's in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it's gorgeous. And I would escape. I think at some level I knew the chaos was going on because Mom, of course, it affected her. And that, oh, sorry.
It's all right.
And Mom's energy, of course, affected us all, and me especially. And so at some level, we knew this wasn't normal and things were not right.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the whole, yeah, I mean, that doesn't, go ahead. I mean, you knew it wasn't normal.
I'd walk. Yeah. So I'd be walking. I'd walk all through the hills, and I still do that. I take off and walk in nature. That was my calming thing. And
who lives? Is that house still there today?
No, they tore it down. Yeah, Mom sold it when she moved to England in 1983. No. Oh, I take that back. No, Jamie and Randy, I think, lived there for a while after Mom moved to England. So probably in '87 or something, Mom sold it and they raised it. They just tore it down and built a humongous big house on this property.
Yeah, totally sterile house, and yep.
Yeah, fancy, fancy big thing, and so yeah.
When did you guys come together? When, like 50 years from now, when people are listening to this interview, and
oh dear.
Right. No, I mean, this is the thing, because I don't get the impression that, you guys are putting out a lot of information on your mother, on your father.
Uh-huh.
All right, you're,
Uh-huh.
and I get the legacy.
Yeah.
The part of it is making sure that the legacy, or whatever the right word is, that that the history continues. But what is the significance of your father and the work and the sort of persona? I mean, we've just been riffing here for 70 minutes, sort of, and you've been really kind and just hanging with me. And obviously you like to hang, but why is he important? I mean, we are living through arguably one of the most uncertain times in democracy. I would argue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the income inequality is as steep as it was prior to the Great Depression. You have more diversity now. You talk about being with one Hispanic family in the whole school, but it's like we are more diverse today, but yet we have less understanding of where we came from, and that how we are all,
Right.
and so there's a lack of education, there's a lack of hope and despair, and there's this almost freakish, sort of conformist attitude that you must do this and you must do this. I was really, at 40 years old, I was raised to, you go to college, then you're supposed to have a job, and then you're supposed to have a family, and then and it's like,
Right.
okay, but where has it gotten us now is the greed factor is so high. And I paint this little picture because I say, how relevant is what your dad stood for today? And what are you trying,
Yeah.
what are the most important things that his charisma, persona, and genius, why is it relevant today?
I say, I keep thinking it's going to fade away, and people are attracted and drawn to that energy, and so obviously it speaks to them, meets a need, and people speak about his free spirit, and we've talked about that.
Well, you just must roll your eyes when you hear that. I mean, what is it? What about you? What is your?
I love his brilliant mind. I love his brilliant mind and his ability to bring people in, and his yearning for learning, I call it.
Mm-hmm.
Never lose that curiosity. I loved his. I think people are attracted to the fact that he was attracted to everything and everybody. He didn't put a boundary, which could be argued that he should have. But
well, he probably just didn't. He didn't. It wasn't part of his constitution, really.
No, and he just is expansive and loved everything, and he wanted to know everything about everything and everybody. And I love that. I love that about him, and I share some of that. And, I think people are attracted to that, and also the fact that he's a survivor, and
Right.
he was a muse and inspiration to people who, he was compassionate. He was loving, and he, when you rise above the horrible ordeals that he had to go through, he rose above them, and I think that's marvelous.
Well, it's inspirational. I mean, he also.
I think people appreciate it.
Did he? I mean,
Yeah.
did you find out about his upbringing after he passed away, or was he somebody who's always saying, Cathy, I was my, was he relaying those stories to you
No.
in the real time? I'm not saying
It must have been after. I don't remember.
he didn't use it as a chip,
really
or he
did.
didn't use it as a cudgel to
No.
make
No.
you feel guilt, like to say, this is where I came
No.
from, that kind. I know that. What
Oh,
I'm saying is
no.
he didn't brag about it or anything like that.
No.
Yeah.
I don't ever remember him talking about his past, but then I have a bad memory. So he may have.
Right. Was there?
But I
yeah.
would like to. That's a good point. I'm going to ask my siblings.
I would love to know because I think
don't
that's
remember.
the most rewarding thing is when you find out only later that
Mhm.
that in fact he had to overcome so much adversity, more than 99.9% of people had to.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was affected by it, and he was jaded by it
Mm.
in his existence, but he didn't become a victim of it. And
No.
he wouldn't lay blame about it, and he kept
Mm-mm.
persevering. I do want to ask you before I let you go, uh, as the father figure, do, was there a time of crisis where your dad showed not his true charisma and leadership, but he showed true leadership for the family in a way that
Mhm.
would be almost mainstream?
Hmm. Like in a conventional way?
Thank you. Not conventional leadership as the head of the house. Not when he was on the road
Uh,
making money. You said he took pride in
uh-huh.
that. That was it. But was there it could have been a burglar. It
Huh.
could have been whatever. It could have been
Huh.
just some crises where
Hmm.
everybody looked to him and he was conventional in leadership.
Well, I can't remember any situation like that. There may have been. That's another. I'll ask my sibling. That's a good question. I don't remember any situation like that. But
I'm just like, boy, man, just grab a
I
tuna
do
sandwich.
remember. I
Go ahead.
I do remember that he the photo on the cover of the book Grace Beats Karma, standing there in a suit and tie next to us kids, all dressed up for Easter. And for him to do that for mom.
Can you start that over? You cut out again. We have
Oh, sure.
yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, the cover of the book of letters from prison called Grace Beats Karma has a photo that shows how Dad wished he could have been. It's him in a suit and tie, standing next to us kids all dressed up for Easter. And even the girls we have little gloves on. In the 50s, you wore little gloves. And that's what his ideal was. He wished he could be that conventional dad in the suit and tie. And
You
that
really think he wanted to aspire? He really wanted to be that, or that was something that other people?
I think he wished he could please mom.
Right.
I think he wanted to be that way so he could please, he could never please mom ever. And I think he would like to have been able to do that. It wasn't in his makeup, it wasn't how he's wired, but it would have been so much more peaceful at home.
I mean,
And
somewhat considering that I am, in my life now after 13 years, divorced from my wife, realizing that, in fact, I can totally relate to, I don't know, trying to please, but at the same time not conforming to what they want.
mhm.
I mean, you can lose it all,
Mhm.
and through it all,
You got to stay true to yourself. Yeah.
well, you do. I mean,
Yeah.
this might be
That's the
completely.
balance.
What would your dad be doing today if he was still alive?
Huh. That's a good question. Probably reading the paper,
Yeah.
reading the sports
You think he
page,
would? You think he
reading the
would? You
sports
think he would have?
page.
Do you think he would have ever? I don't want to say mellowed out, but I mean, you wonder.
I hard to say. I think he would. I think well, no, we have to say he'd have to stop the drugs. The drugs just played havoc with his system, and he really had a sensitive system physically. Is that he had stomach issues, he couldn't uh anyway, he'd have to have stopped the drugs. Otherwise, he wouldn't have calmed down. I mean, he burned out. I mean, that's what killed him, were all the drugs. And
Yeah.
so I sometimes wonder what he would be like at like my age. I'll be 70 this year, and I think, gosh, what would Dad have been like? Because I know I've changed a lot, and of course, I wasn't doing drugs like
No,
him,
I mean,
so
in
that
fact,
was the key,
you're probably
the drugs.
in great shape because of the fact that you avoided a lot of that carnage. Your dad took it to the extreme, I mean, but
right.
it's do you have any connection to the other Merry Pranksters and their families?
No.
I like it. You
I
really,
never. No.
Yeah, no. I mean, I dig.
never
I really dig it. I mean, it's cool because
Yeah.
a lot of them. I mean, I love. I've gone to interview Ken Babbs and people like that, and they all kind of cloister up in Eugene up there, where the cream, but I dig the fact that that you love and continue the legacy of your parents and sort of not necessarily like part of the whole prankster.
Yeah, I never did drugs or smoked or I drank, of course, when I was single, but I don't anymore. And it's just it's a different lifestyle. I'm now retired and writing and gardening, with the grandkids, that kind of thing. But I think it would be interesting, though. I've often wanted to just go around and interview all the kids like me who were raised, in the Beat aura. And I'd love to just, Daniel Pinchbeck wrote an article or two about that for, he wrote some good articles. He interviewed, like my half-brother, Kurt Hansen, and before he passed away, and my brother John, and I think it would be cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've already done. I mean,
I've
I've interviewed Sunshine and Zane Keesey, and haven't interviewed Simon Babbs yet, but I've interviewed Jamie, and now I've interviewed you. And everybody has their own trip.
There's your book. Yeah.
Well, it's part of it, but I will be glad. I'd love to. Cathy, I wish you the most happy Mother's Day. I hope we can do part 2 in the future. I will be back in Napa very soon, and maybe I will come. We can do a Facebook Live interview and get it out to the world, and you can talk about all these projects. But your father. I'm not I'm not a Beat scholar. I'm not a Neal Cassady scholar, but I am somebody who is following my true nature and doing my own kind of. I'm doing my own Neal Cassady without knowing who he really, never meeting him, never knowing him, and not having to deal with any kind of the odds that he was up against. My entire sort of cadence and my entire approach to broadcasting and getting inside people's minds has everything to do with what your dad and what all those cats stood for. So I feel honored to be on that path, and it was an honor to talk to you today.
Wonderful. It was my pleasure, Jake. Thank you.
And I think I have a friend request to you on Facebook. I would love if you friended me, because I'm going to be transcribing a lot of these stories and blowing them out on new media. And
okay.
So and let's just stay in touch, and we'll continue the conversation.
Great. Enjoy Napa. Beautiful there.
Yeah, well, I'll come see you too.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, we'll be in
You're
touch.
welcome anytime.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, happy
thanks.
Mother's Day.
No, thank you.
Bye.
You have a good one too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.